On December 6, 1917, two ships collided in Halifax Harbor, and the massive explosion that followed went down in history as the largest pre-nuclear blast. But the real question is this: was it really just an accident, or did the authorities rebuild everything so quickly and systematically because they didn't want us to see what the explosion had uncovered? Because when you look closely at photographs of the blast zone, you don't just see destroyed modern buildings. There are stone foundations emerging from the rubble, massive walls, and structural remains that appear far older than the city's known history, none of which are mentioned in any official records. And this is precisely where the Halifax explosion opens the door to a secret that our history books quietly skip over: the Mudflood layer. What I'm about to tell you may seem unbelievable and strange at first, but as you examine each detail, the only question you'll ask is, why did they never tell us this? That morning, Halifax didn't just witness the catastrophe of a modern port city. It was also the moment when traces of a systematically hidden civilization lying underground came to light. What does the official narrative offer us? The French ship Mont-Blanc was loaded with explosives. It collided with the Norwegian ship Imo. A massive fire broke out, and then came the horrific explosion that wiped the northern end of the city off the map. 2,000 people died, 9,000 were injured, thousands of homes were destroyed. A tragic, terrible, acceptable explanation, until you look at the rubble photographs and the post-explosion reconstruction process. Because if you start examining carefully, a completely different story begins to whisper to you. It was the final years of World War I, and Halifax was a critical port serving as a shipping point for Allied vessels opening onto the Atlantic. The Mont-Blanc was filled with highly flammable and explosive materials like TNT, picric acid, and benzene. It was essentially a floating bomb. When they encountered the Imo in the narrow strait during morning hours, a series of wrong maneuvers made collision inevitable. Fire broke out on Mont-Blanc's deck, the crew abandoned ship, and approximately 20 minutes later, an explosion of incomprehensible force occurred. Half the city instantly turned to rubble. The blast wave shook structures miles away, windows shattered, people were buried under flying debris. A tsunami wave swept the shore. The power of the explosion was so great that seismic waves were recorded from miles away. But this is precisely where we need to step outside the official narrative and ask the real question: did this explosion only destroy the modern city on the surface, or did it also uncover something else beneath that was never mentioned? The mud flood theory describes a great mud flood or catastrophe allegedly occurring on a global scale in the late 1800s. According to this theory, advanced ancient civilizations like Tartaria were destroyed or hidden as a result of this disaster, and the subsequent New World Order systematically buried these old structures underground, covering them over and building modern cities on top. A similar situation occurred during the 1910 Paris flood, when the floodwaters receded. Old structures, tunnels, and mysterious remains lying underground came to light, and immediately afterward authorities quickly restored these areas and covered them up. Did the same thing happen in Halifax? Before the explosion, Halifax was a rapidly growing city known for its elegant Victorian architecture. But how was the construction speed of that era, the quality of materials used, and the incredible details of some buildings possible with the technology of that age? When you look at the sources, some structures from that period possess stonework and engineering knowledge that couldn't be replicated even today. In photographs emerging after the explosion, massive stone foundations, square-cut granite blocks, and structures extending underground are visible beneath modern wooden and brick houses. None of these structures match the architectural style after Halifax's official founding date of 1749. Even more interesting, in some rubble photographs, wall sections pulled from underground are seen covered with layers of mud and sediment, as if these structures had long been buried underground and the explosion had brought them back to light. And this is where Halifax's post-explosion reconstruction process comes into play. Under normal circumstances, after such a major disaster, it takes years for a city to recover. Even debris cleanup takes months. But what happened in Halifax? The explosion occurred in December 1917, and with incredible speed, the city was rebuilt in nearly 1 year. Thousands of houses, new roads, infrastructure systems. How so fast? Yes, international aid came. Yes, it was wartime and logistics were rapid, but still, could this speed have served another purpose? During debris removal operations, the old structures that emerged were not systematically documented, photographed, or preserved. Instead, they were quickly removed, covered with soil, and new modern buildings were constructed, as if there were things there that shouldn't be seen, shouldn't be questioned. Rescue teams and authorities arriving in the area after the explosion didn't just save people. They also quickly isolated certain areas, restricted press access, and completely banned entry to some sections of the debris zone. Why? The official explanation was security. But was that really all? According to Mudflood theory, even if the Halifax explosion wasn't deliberate, it gave authorities an unexpected opportunity to completely erase traces remaining from the old world and cover them with a modern city. Just like after the Chicago fire, San Francisco earthquake, or Paris flood, cities were rebuilt after these disasters, but each time traces of the old heritage were systematically destroyed. When you look at pre-explosion Halifax maps, you see that some streets continued underground. Some buildings' basements were much deeper than normal. After the explosion, these areas were quickly filled in and rebuilt at the new level. Was the city's ground level raised? In many old photographs, ground floors of buildings appear half-buried. Did the explosion reveal this burial reality? And perhaps most importantly, after the Halifax explosion, local people had very little information about what lay beneath their city. Documents and archives, rubble photographs, and maps were limited. Some records were said to have been lost or destroyed in fire. But how do records also get lost after an explosion? As if certain pages of history were deliberately torn out. Now let's look at the bigger picture. Halifax is not alone. Supporters of Mudflood theory claim there are similar traces in hundreds of cities worldwide. Underground floors, half-buried windows, rising ground levels, mysterious old structures, and each time, a major disaster uncovering them. Fire, earthquake, flood, explosion. And the rapid reconstruction processes that follow. Could the traces of this lost civilization called Tartaria have been systematically erased along with such events? Was the Halifax explosion part of this great erasure operation? Perhaps the explosion really was an accident. Perhaps the collision of Mont-Blanc and Imo was entirely coincidental. But the consequences? Were the consequences coincidental? I don't think they were coincidental. Because after an explosion that uncovered old structures and triggered questions, authorities' response was surprisingly quick, organized, and silent. No questioning, no archaeological investigation, no preservation effort, just a quick cover-up, quick reconstruction, and then silence. Today, when you go to Halifax, you see a modern port city. Tourists are shown the explosion monument. The story is told in the museum. The tragedy is remembered. But no one tells you what lies beneath the city. No one explains what those massive stone structures uncovered from under the rubble after the explosion were. No one has questioned why some photographs disappeared from the archives. And no one thinks about what that mud layer means. Because official history only tells us what we need to know. The rest? The rest remains under the rubble, underground, in forgotten archives. The Halifax explosion may have truly been an accident, but the truth it uncovered was never an accident. That truth was a layer that had to be systematically hidden, the Mudflood layer. The remains of an old world, an old civilization, an old technology. And that morning, Halifax briefly revealed this secret, until authorities quickly came and covered everything back up. But let's not forget, no lie, secrecy, or concealment lasts forever, and we will learn these truths sooner or later.